Hi, Tim.
Hey, Laura.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. Here we are again.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay.
Was that?
I said that's just fine with me.
It's fine with me too.
It's a beautiful day today
Yeah, fine with me too.
that we're all stuck inside now.
So go see where participants are.
Okay.
Click on that.
And
move to participants.
is that Clayton? Or is there another Van Cleek? Okay. Well then, welcome. If you'd care to identify yourself, we'd love to see that. So Vicky is there, Regis? I hear her in the background.
Yes, yep.
Well, Ryan Van Cleek, thank you for that. I see it in the chat. Very nice to meet you, Ryan. Thank you for being here. Okay. Okay, so Regis, I'm going to make you a co-host.
Okay.
And if I need you,
I have everybody listed here already.
okay. Tim, do you think we should have the video, or I should have the video prepared in case somebody wants to see it if we have a lot of new people?
That's up to you. It's linked on the information page that I'm going to share a link to for people to get more info. So
Okay.
if it seems timely or relevant as we get into the discussion, maybe it's worth having ready, but I'm going to direct folks to that info page and it'll be there.
Okay, I will, I think, hopefully there'll be a lot of questions. I think that's the main point of today, is to let people be heard and ask their questions, and for you and Pat to be heard.
Agreed.
So, okay. If it comes up in the discussion somehow, we can point to it on that page and people can watch it on their own time.
Sounds good.
Oh, I've got to go get my glass of water. I'll be right back.
Hey, Tim, not to get this started or anything like that, but we had a conversation a while ago about workforce development and having some sort of center for workforce development on the campus, sort of a public-private relationship, because we certainly have an issue with people being available for work, during the Great Resignation, and a fact of the matter is it's a demographic situation that we have, and they're just people who have retired or just moved on. There's just nobody behind them. And so I think that demographically, the issue is that there are going to be fewer people being required to do more of the work, so that they need to know more, do more, be paid more, all that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of upskilling that's really going to be required. And I was just thinking, as part and parcel of this great project, that if you wouldn't mind saying a few words when we get started here about workforce development and the possibilities of generating this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely key to all this, and we have already started. I'm not sure we'll go into depth unless there's questions and the group wants to discuss it further, but during the county executive's budget address back in October, he kind of highlighted very briefly the idea of a Center for Workforce and Economic Innovation at Tech City. And so that's on our radar. We've been having really good conversations with partners in academia and education and in workforce development. And so I think there's a clear desire on all parties' sides to move in that direction. So it's not quite clear how it'll shake out, but it's certain that something will be there. So
Yeah, great, great.
Hey, here we go. We got action here. Hi, March.
Guys.
hey, March.
Hi, March.
Hi, Deb. Oh, Deb is not connected yet. Hello, Sarah Wank.
Hi.
How are you today?
Okay, I'm gonna make sure my hair looks all right before I turn the camera on. Been outside pulling up dead plants. And
Ah, fun stuff. And I know Pat had a meeting that supposedly ended at 2, which is why I made this 2:30 to give him some cushion. So hopefully he won't be too long. Hello, Andrew. And hello, Deb Harris.
Hello.
Hello,
Hello. Hello, both welcome.
thank you.
And Cheryl, welcome. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Here he is. Oh, you don't need to come up here. Hi, Pat.
Hey, Laura. Hey, everybody.
Hi, Pat.
Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. Dan Schott, welcome. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm just fine on this lovely Sunday. Thank you. And Dan, hello. How are you? Laura Petit, welcome. Sue L, hello there. We'll give it just maybe 2 minutes and see who else we might get, and then we will get started.
Laura and Regis and everybody, thank you for organizing this and taking the time.
It's thank you for your time on a Sunday
my
afternoon.
gosh, yeah.
Tell Rebecca and Theo we are sorry to take you away again, but we appreciate it.
He's napping, so he's all good.
Oh, all right.
Crushing the nap right now.
Welcome to Kevin. I don't know Kevin's last name, but welcome. Cynthia Bell, Town of Ulster in the house. Welcome to you. And Jonathan Burkhart, hello.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Okay, 1 more minute, and then we're going to kick it off here. Finn, good afternoon. Welcome to townofulstercitizens.org. Carol, good afternoon. Welcome. Oh, wow. Here we go.
Thanks.
Oh, okay. Everybody move positions on me. Dan, I think oh, he's not connected yet. Dan, good afternoon. Welcome. Karen, welcome. Is that Karen and Wayne?
Karen will be with me in a minute.
Okay, oh, sorry. Hi there, Wayne.
March, that chair looks amazingly comfortable. How do I get one of those?
There's a funny story about this chair. You know, Don Gregorius, the county legislator, just passed away recently, former county legislator. But I stopped at a stone house near me on 32. It was having like an estate sale. It's right around the corner, me and my son. And Don and his wife were helping the family sell some of the contents. And my son sat down in this rocking chair and he's like, Mom, you have to sit in this chair. It's so comfortable. So we did wind up buying it that day and we bought it from Don.
Wow.
It's nice.
Yeah. Knew him when he was working, you know, on behalf of the people of Ulster County. I think he represented the district that's largely Hepner's district today. Yeah. So it was Don Gregorius and my son that got me this chair. It's remarkably comfortable. You know, in old furniture, like we just don't make things like we used to.
Okay, so welcome to Clark, Alexandria, and Alona. I think that's everyone. So we're actually a minute over my time, but while we got everybody in here, so we're going to get started. My name is Laura Hartman, and I'm the chair of townofulstercitizens.org. And I'd like to welcome everybody here on a Sunday afternoon, one of the few sunny ones we've had recently. I would like to acknowledge my partner in crime here at Town of Ulster Citizens, Regis Obajiski. And I'd like to thank County Executive Pat Ryan and the Director of Economic Development for Ulster County, Tim Weidemann. Thank you for your time on a Sunday afternoon. Oh, Tim, I'm just seeing your note. I will do that right now. And of course, you're way at the bottom.
Here.
Okay, co-host, here we go. And if everybody could mute their microphones. So we're here to talk about the recent sale of Tech City. I don't know if, I know there are a few people that are on this call that were actually at the press conference on Wednesday, which was an incredibly hopeful day, as cold as it was, and a very exciting day to be at Tech City. As I said in my remarks, it was the first time I had felt joy being over there, and I lived across the street from there for 12 years and used to walk over there quite a bit. So Pat and Tim have graciously agreed to be here to answer questions for the public about the sale and just give you an opportunity to learn about what's transpiring. The process. Town of Ulster Citizens has always called for this to be transparent. So I'm thankful to the two of you for making that happen today. So as to get started, I think if we could maybe talk about the details of the sale and what we gain from it and what's happening with Alan Ginsberg. I think those are the main questions that I've seen from people, and I have myself. So the property, the East Campus, and that's what we're talking about today. I'm hoping everybody's aware that the west part where the Bank of America building is already owned by the county. That we took in foreclosure. That was last year, right?
Yep,
and
that's
so,
right.
Yeah, so we're talking about the east side of the campus, the major portion of Tech City. And the county was in the process of foreclosing when this transpired. So I think that's a good place to start with the process. If Tim or Pat, whoever wants to address the sale and what's transpired.
Yeah, and I don't want to take too long, but we threw together just a few slides to just kind of give a little context, because I think certainly there's a lot of moving pieces here, and we're happy to share this out. Obviously, you can screenshot it as well, of course, and everything. But just to get everybody up to speed. In the middle of a pandemic, we were also working on this in the background, and we just want to make sure everybody has all the context as we weigh this really important decision. And just to, Tim's going to do the majority of the chat speaking, just because he's been, as I said at the event, quarterbacking this. But I just want to give a little bit of high-level context and then hand it to him. And this will just only be very few minutes. We really just primarily want to do questions, and we'll take as long as we need to answer everybody's questions. I said this a few minutes ago, but more people have joined. Laura, I just want to thank you and Regis and Town of Ulster citizens for not just hosting this, but being active, small d democratic participants in this process throughout. I also want to thank County Comptroller March Gallagher for both her advice on this early and often, and also consistent calls for transparency. Appreciate that, and it's important. And this is another, obviously, step to effectuate that. So for those that weren't there in the freezing cold on, was that Wednesday? Whatever day that was. The clouds broke and a little sun came out about halfway through, and I thought that was very symbolic. We were standing under the clock tower at IBM, and just so you know where I'm coming from and where I think a lot of us are coming from, I think it's important that this is personal to all of us, like deeply personal, whether you're a neighbor, whether like me, you grew up, my grandpa worked there 36 years. And now my whole adult life, I've watched this site just sort of be depressing and stalemated. So, oh yeah, there we go. There's some photos to capture that. We were standing under that clock tower there that no longer has IBM on top. And you can see some of the photos of the state of disrepair, the asbestos piles that we all know, and decades of neglect and misalignment with our community's values. And I think, I'm not saying this to like make us feel down or beat a dead horse, but I just think it's actually important to understand how materially challenging this situation is and the site is, because that did and does inform the strategy that we took. If this were 20 years ago and the site were not where it is, I think there'd be a different set of constraints and opportunities. But where we are now, there are a lot of constraints and a very narrow window of opportunity. And I'm really proud that we've navigated that. And so the point we're at now, really, and I'll pass it to Tim here, this is the transition, is that in my view, we've finally reached a point where like we've stemmed the bleeding and stopped the bleeding. We've got, I think, qualified doctors and medical professionals that we're bringing in to deal with the patient and the situation. And we've, I think, been wise enough as a county to recognize that county government is probably not best suited to do the next phase of this, which is, you know, we've stabilized things. We've gotten out a bad actor, brought in a very good and vetted actor, which we'll talk more about. And now we'll maintain general oversight. And we're putting in a bunch of clawbacks and protections into the contract, which we'll talk about. But really now we can bring in other people's money, other capital, up to $200 million to revitalize the site. And so this is really a beginning point, not an end point, certainly. And my request to you all is, of course, we want to talk about the specifics, but this is only going to work if everybody participates, not just at this decision point, but going forward. So to ask you all to continue to do that and invite that. And we really, Tim and I talked about this 2+ years ago. Let's have a different model of how we do economic development. Let's not do it the way that everybody that's kind of been done in the past, that often feels not as satisfying and not as transparent. And we really want to try to do this in a different way, and that'll take you all actively participating. And I appreciate how many people are here today, because that's a great sign. So Tim, if you want to go into some of the more specifics, we can go from there.
Yeah, happy to do it. So I think, Pat, maybe you already spoke a little bit about this, but just to kind of give the elevator pitch of the sale that's proposed here. Folks may have read some of this in the newspaper, so some of this may be review, but just to kind of put it all out there, the proposed purchase is by a developer and real estate company known as National Resources. They have a model, a brand for redevelopment of old industrial sites that they call iPark. And so at the press conference on Wednesday, they kind of revealed their preliminary name, at least, for this redevelopment and this campus, iPark 87. And the quick overview, it would be a $200 million anticipated investment by these real estate developers that would create a vibrant mixed-use campus, so a mix of commercial uses. They're proposing some residential, recreational, open space as well, supporting up to 1,000 new jobs. And with a focus on sustainability, which I think steps back to the values alignment that Pat mentioned with the county, and I think that's something that that the group seems keenly aware. They have to be kind of focused on what works in the given communities that they look to work in. And so a little bit more on how we got to where we are, and this is kind of the quick recap. And happy to then take questions and have this be mostly a discussion. And I'll also point to where all this information lives online. So if you want to dive deeper or look into it, you're welcome to do so. So the sale is really part of a negotiated settlement to the foreclosure proceedings. Back in July of this year, Ulster County started the foreclosure process on the remaining parcels on the east side. Laura mentioned that we had already actually completed a foreclosure on 2 of the parcels that are on the west side of the campus. But back in July, we started the foreclosure on the remainder. So Mr. Ginsberg has been delinquent in paying taxes on all of the parcels. Most of them are past the 3-year period of delinquency that allows the county to begin this foreclosure process. And so, after we had started that, National Resources, this developer, approached the county to assist with the acquisition. So they were interested in it, but now that the county had started that foreclosure process, it required a conversation with the county, which I'll just mention as an aside, and we can go into this. The map kind of describes this too. There were some parcels on the east side of the campus that were purchased back in August. And probably to everyone's detriment, the purchasers there did not approach the county, did not approach the town, and so really was unable to discuss the challenges of the site and how to overcome those challenges. But National Resources is experienced in this stuff, so they had reached out to talk about their plans. And so after they put together a conversation with the current owner that arrived at a conclusion of what it would take to get the current owner out of the picture, we put together an agreement of all the parties and put it in front of a judge. And the judge executed that as the roadmap for the conclusion of the foreclosure process and then a sale of the properties after the foreclosure to National Resources. So, just to clarify, Laura, you used the past tense in describing the sale. The sale hasn't been completed yet. It's in process. And so it's worthy of note. And that's why we're here today, to talk about this, make sure that everybody's aware of what's going on and have a chance for people to ask questions and give feedback. So, but I want to highlight, if this doesn't go through, just because I think sometimes when we see an alternative like this that seems pretty exciting arise, it's easy to forget that the alternative is really the same thing we've seen happening for the last 20 years. There isn't some other deal here that is, on the table. This is really a kind of, we move forward with this, or we take the chances that we continue down the road that we've been on, which, obviously is not a very pleasant road and one that's got some challenges ahead as well. So as I mentioned, the county began foreclosure proceedings in July. We did that because we're pretty confident that we will end up winning those foreclosure proceedings. It's a pretty straightforward thing. The taxes haven't been paid. And so unfortunately, in the way that foreclosures in rem proceedings happen, there are lots of steps that the person that is being foreclosed upon can take to delay and slow down that process. And so although we expect to be awarded in favor in the foreclosure process, the transfer of the properties can be held up really for quite some time by that legal process of foreclosure, including by a step that wouldn't be surprising to see an owner like Mr. Ginsberg take if he was pushed into a corner, which is a bankruptcy proceeding. And so, I think it's worth noting that although we have faith we will eventually secure the properties through the foreclosure process, that could take a lot of time. And in the meantime, we thought that things were rough right now with a kind of absentee landlord. Once we end up in a place where the foreclosure has been awarded and property owner declares bankruptcy, limbo is the true state of things. And that in that case, there's no taxes being collected. The county continues to make the town and the school district whole, which basically is kind of a shuffling of where those tax dollars are paid, but they ultimately come out of the county taxpayers' pockets. There's further deterioration of the buildings, which is of note because as we saw in the demolition of some buildings that resulted in new contamination with asbestos piles, asbestos inside buildings is fine as long as it's taken care of. But as soon as those buildings start to deteriorate, that becomes a major issue. And so further deterioration is a significant concern here. And then obviously we have the missed opportunity cost of any possible economic activity that could be happening on the site, generating jobs and generating spending in our community. None of that takes place. And so really this ultimately continues the vicious cycle that we've seen over the last 25 years of decline on the site. And every year that goes by, it gets harder to revive this site. It's further underwater on taxes. The environmental issues get more challenging. And ultimately, there's a risk here that this is a permanently blighted site that takes a major and substantial investment in order to turn it back around. So the proposed sale, to go into a little bit more of the details on what's proposed instead of that vicious cycle, the map here on the left shows a picture of the campus. It's a little fuzzy, so let me kind of orient you. On the north side is Route 209. Towards the bottom at an angle there is Boyce's Lane, and on the right is the railroad tracks. An Enterprise Drive just bisects the overall campus straight through. The yellow parcels, everything in yellow there is what's proposed to be purchased by National Resources. The green on the left are the parcels that Laura mentioned before that the county foreclosed on. Actually, the foreclosure started in 2019. We were awarded in late 2019, early 2020, and then surplus those to the LDC. UCEDA, Ulster County Economic Development Alliance, now holds those as of mid-year this year. The light blue parcels on the right were purchased by Mio Merino, a clothing wholesaler and distributor, back in August. Those are, like many of the parcels on the campus, really just building pads. So they exist within a larger campus on top of a master development parcel, which is included in the yellow there. And so altogether, this is 165 or so acres that includes that master parcel and is the remainder of Mr. Ginsberg's holdings on the campus. And it's proposed for a purchase price of $12 million, which includes $5 million in cash payments to the county, plus credits for $7 million in cleanup costs, which I can go into in more detail. There's probably questions about that. I'm happy to explain. The purchase would require the buyer to complete the cleanup activities on the site and to start the redevelopment process. And if those milestones aren't met, the property would revert back to the county. So a quick roadmap of where we go from here, just to kind of explain the process. And I'll start with some things that have already been completed this month. And you'll see that it's a quick process with basically all the major steps contained within the month of December. On December 1st, Ulster County Court Judge Brian Rounds issued the order and stipulation of settlement that laid out the terms of a sale. And then on the 2nd, at their session, when the legislature usually adopts the budget, they added some resolutions that allowed this to start moving forward. Those are to authorize the county to accept the deeds to the property and to set a public hearing. The public hearing is a requirement in state law before a surplus of the property. So the county gets them in foreclosure, but before it can surplus them to an LDC to sell them, it has to have a public hearing. And so they set that public hearing date, which we'll see in a minute, is on the 21st. We had a press conference this past Wednesday to announce the settlement agreement. And now here we are in the 12th in this forum talking about the terms of the proposed sale. The next major step will be on the 21st, and a few things happen that day. The legislature will hold its public hearing at 6:30 p.m. There's details on their website, and we also have those details on the page that I'll point you to in a minute. And after that public hearing, taking into consideration the input from the public, the county legislature will take up a resolution to surplus the properties, which basically says, okay, county got them through the foreclosure. Now it's going to move forward to sell them by moving them over to our local development corporation, which is authorized to enter into purchase and sale agreements for the sale of property. And then on or slightly after, depending on meeting dates, the local development corporation that receives the properties, that's the UCEDA, Ulster County Economic Development Alliance, would execute the purchase and sale agreement with National Resources, or IPARC 87 as the case may be, and that would actually affect the sale of the properties. A little asterisk there that there's state requirements about a notice to the state on transactions like this that would require a holding period of 90 days. So it would actually be that the closing and the purchase and sale agreement are executed, but the deeds to the properties take 90 days to transfer over to National Resources. So that's the timeline that's ahead. And in order to get there, there's a lot of information that we're asking folks to digest, both you all and the county legislature who are moving through this process as our partners. And so we've put together a kind of compendium of all this information on a county webpage. You can see here some of the smattering of stuff that's up there, including maybe one that I'll pull attention to, the proposed purchase FAQ. So we have right now 10 questions that we've been hearing that are up there with answers to them, and we'll add more questions as they come up in today's session and in future conversations. So quickly, the URL for that is up on the screen. It's a little long, but that's the shortest I could manage to get it. And then in addition to that website with more information, since we are in the period of a public hearing, comments can be formally submitted to the county legislature through an email to the county clerk, and the email address is up there on the screen. Pat, that's the quick overview, and wanted to keep it brief so we could have some discussion. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, and I know, thank you, Tim. I know Laura had started off with 2 high-level questions. So I'll turn it back to you, Laura, to ask you how you want to run this portion here. We're at your disposal. I'm happy to field questions, or if you want to.
I'm seeing there's, which I was paying attention to Tim's presentation, and I really wanted to hear what he said, but we're going to get to the chat. But if we could get started with, I want to ask a question from the press conference the other day. I don't know if this was a joke or it wasn't a part of your formal speech, but you said something, because I think people, and we all, I think rightly feel that Ginsberg is kind of getting off by, no, he's not getting any money for the property. But he's done a lot of damage here and owes us a lot of money. But you had said something about potential criminal action. Is there something serious to that, or is there anything that he feels some of the pain we've had? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly the one I've wrestled with most here on both a personal level and a, kind of public policy level. So there's a few pieces to this. One, I mean, I think like emotionally, we are all infuriated and beyond with the way that Mr. Ginsberg has dealt with this, the disservice he's done, the lack of any moral, any morality or humanity in how he's dealt with the site, dealt with the community, not paid taxes for, in some cases, decade plus. But, and I think, take a deep breath after that, and then think about the situation that we're in, which is that we had already started foreclosure proceedings on this campus, which essentially, and I didn't fully understand this until a few years ago, once you start foreclosure proceedings, you've essentially made the decision that you're at your last option. And if a foreclosure succeeds, no taxes get paid. That's just part of how foreclosure works. So we're already at a point where we had made that decision and said, look, things aren't going to get any better if we stay in this vicious cycle, which is a phrase Tim used, which I like on the slide. And we have to somehow change the structural dynamics in this relationship. So at that point, the 2 options were let the foreclosure go through, which could take years and years and get mired in bankruptcy, or try to get a better deal. And by the way, would result in no back taxes and no money, or try to get a better deal. So what we did to change those conditions is we did, when I took office, whenever it was, two plus years ago, we got the EPA more involved and said, guys, this is ridiculous that we're not holding Ginsberg more accountable. We got them to trigger CERCLA, which is essentially the federal Superfund legislation, and their lawyers working with our lawyers were able to pierce the corporate veil of Ginsberg's multiple LLCs and actually hold him personally, financially, and criminally potentially liable for their failure to do asbestos work. We've seen some of the contractors Ginsberg hired have been held and convicted now in plea deals of criminal behavior. And so I believe that the main thing that changed the dynamics on this site and brought Ginsberg to the table at all was that threat of him finally being held accountable in some way. That path, though, also would take years and years and would never result in taxes being paid regardless, frankly, unfortunately. So the short answer here, after a lot of, I know, color there and context, is as unsatisfying as it is on a emotional level, the best thing for the community is to get a bad actor out and bring in something better. And I know that that is frustrating, but that's just kind of the reality of it. The good news, the other good news is, I think from a reputational perspective and a personal perspective, certainly we have not let Mr. Ginsberg get away. I mean, I've been very aggressive and clear. Many others have about his failure to the community. And I think, unfortunately, that's probably the best that we're going to be able to get there. And then just knowing that we've gotten rid of him. I know that's unsatisfying, though. I don't know if that really answers your question.
It does. And I think the other thing that's important to point out too, if with Tim's vicious cycle, and if nothing were done at this point, the EPA would come in and clean up that property. And I'm asking you to correct me if I'm wrong in this. But then that would become a lien on the property because the EPA just doesn't do that for free. So that would add to the back taxes issue and totally really make the property worthless because the liens on the property far outweigh what the property is worth. Is that correct?
Yeah, the property, as Tim said, is deeply underwater already. 12+ million in taxes owed, anywhere from 8 to 12 to even 15 million additional in environmental remediation costs. So you think about that as a sort of value proposition as an investor, like that's just not a viable thing for most folks or anyone to take on. And to your point, someone has to pay the cost of the environmental remediation, either a private investor, the taxpayers through either federal or state or county taxes or some version of that. And so this deal actually passes that cost out of the public dollars into private dollars. And we're going to forgive 7 million of that as part of this deal. So we're essentially getting 7 million from that the private developer will pay to clean up, but any estimate of the remediation costs are much higher than that. So anything above that, National Resources takes on personally, through their private funds. Any additional costs, any unexpected other costs of remediation that we're not aware of, all fall on National Resources.
Thank you. I think that's a good place for us to start and clarifies a lot of the big questions that I've seen frequently about this exchange of money. So I'm going to just go to the chat and go one by one. And the first one is from Alona, right? Yeah, Alona. What benchmarks, milestones are in the contract to ensure that it's environmentally safe? And with what independent verification? What specific numbers on what specific pollutants?
I'm happy to jump in there, Pat, if you want. So the cleanup, let's just make one clarifying distinction. There are two main cleanup efforts on the site. One dates back to IBM's time that has to do with solvents that IBM used on the site and that created contamination in a groundwater plume under the site. That continues to be monitored and remediated by IBM. They have an obligation through the state, through what's called a consent order, to complete that. They are held accountable to that. We have regular check-ins with DEC as DEC has questions or concerns, if any, about that monitoring and completion. And IBM ultimately has been faithful to their obligation in that cleanup effort, as evidenced by a shrinking of the plume and progress being made on that cleanup front. But let's set that aside. That continues to be, no matter who owns the site, that continues to be IBM's obligation to monitor and remediate those solvents. The cleanup that we're talking about here is the cleanup of asbestos-containing material that was created when Mr. Ginsberg demolished buildings without the proper abatement of that asbestos. And so that's created a new contamination issue, which is predominantly asbestos-containing materials. the EPA has put Alan under what's called a uniform administrative order, which is an enforcement document that basically requires Alan to clean up the mess that he created. He's been dragging his feet, as maybe you all are aware. And so we did have the EPA begin to take actions. They covered the piles back in the summer, and they've actually already placed one lien on the properties to cover that cost, which is about $640,000. And so EPA is prepared to move forward with the rest of that cleanup, but ultimately EPA doesn't do it themselves. They do it through contractors, and in this case, they're holding Mr. Ginsberg accountable to pay for those contractors. So what happens in this case is that National Resources, because Alan has proven basically that he doesn't have the capacity to complete that cleanup and no intention to do so, in order to accomplish the cleanup, National Resources would step into Mr. Ginsberg's shoes. They would take on the order under EPA, and they would complete the cleanup work with EPA monitoring and to EPA's satisfaction. And so ultimately, I think, Alona, that's the answer to that question, is that EPA would monitor the cleanup, and it would only be considered complete when it meets EPA standards.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Her next question is, what indication do you have that Ginsberg would file for bankruptcy? Has anyone checked on his financial status?
I can just say that
I'm not sure I totally, or Tim,
Yeah.
do you want to start on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what indication do we have that he would declare bankruptcy? I think the indication is just the pattern of past behavior that says ultimately he's unwilling to separate from these properties without feeling like he has somehow, struck the best deal he possibly can. And I think that, as an add-on to the county executive's remarks about the struggle here about, feeling like somehow the ability for Alan to get out of responsibility for some aspect of this is something we want to avoid. I think we have to counter that a little bit with the sense that ultimately what we want here is the site to be turned around and put back into productive use. And in this case, I think the all likelihood is, given past behaviors, that if we pursue the most aggressive legal actions against Alan, he will continue to retrench and take every step he can, every legal action, every legal remedy he can to protect his interests in the properties. So that's the expectation. That's the basis for that.
Okay, and then her third question, why is IBM not being held accountable? They've had billions in stock buybacks over the past decades that could have gone to clean up their messes. What is the status of the attempts to get them to take care of their mess? Well, they have been taking care of their mess. They have lived up to the agreements that they've had with the town and the county to do that, and they have made great progress. It's not to our liking, and this is a question we've struggled with for a long time. But they have a very long time to do it.
Yeah, just to clarify and build on that, because it's complex. Basically, underground is IBM's responsibility, and above ground was, whoever the owner is, in this case, Mr. Ginsberg, for the last 20 some years. And so IBM, to Laura's point, has been very responsible. That's all under New York State DEC is overseeing and monitoring that ground plume remediation and is proceeding as it's supposed to, and IBM's been responsible on that. When the decision was made to sell the property to Ginsberg, that was all negotiated and agreed upon as part of that deal. And we could look back on that deal and certainly have done it better in a lot of dimensions, but that was in 1998 that was essentially set in place.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move. I know, Alona, you have another question, but I want to make sure we get to everyone. So if we have time, we'll come back to that. Question one from Marcus Sanders. Will you ensure there will be no pilots? We cannot endure any more tax breaks. Property taxes are extremely high. Existing homeowners and business owners need tax relief.
So number one, I'm certainly not a fan of pilots that don't make sense and benefit and provide public good. And I think the recent Romeo Kia discussion hopefully is create some, proof beyond me saying that I think we have to draw a line of the appropriate use of tax incentives and the inappropriate use. To me, and this is obviously a broad concept, but if there's real, genuine public good, then I think it's worth the discussion to get into the specifics of the terms and what that public good is. So on this specific transfer, the buyer, National Resources, is not asking for any tax incentives, any pilot, anything other than what's been talked about. And again, that all the details of that agreement are up on that page, and you can review them as well. I think setting fair expectations, there's certainly a real likelihood that individual businesses that they're going to try to attract in will seek pilots or some other tax incentives. This is a really challenging site wherever you go on the site. And so I think the good news in that is that each of those will be handled as its own thing, and we'll have the opportunities to weigh in there. To me, this is even more impetus that we have to have a real discussion about IDA reforms and policies before these decisions get in front of us. Particularly about, for example, I saw another question, I don't mean to skip out of order, but we're going to desperately need affordable workforce housing around, either on or around, to support this site. Right now, our IDA policies don't incentivize that. In fact, it's kind of the opposite at best. So I'd love to see us as a community, with you all hopefully actively involved, say, look, let's actually use the fact that we know some of these other projects might come before an IDA. Let's use this as sort of a forcing function to wrestle with and think through those issues now and decide, what do we want to incentivize? What values do we want to prioritize? In my view, if someone's going to come build true workforce housing, that might merit tax incentives. If they're going to build a true, 21st century green project with the right levels of commitments to sustainability and energy and so on, that might merit, those kinds of things. We have a window to have those discussions now, because the first step of this deal is to do the cleanup and kind of level set there. And I think the earliest we'd see specific projects would be, later in 2022. So again, the short answer is there's no proposed tax incentives or pilot now, but I wouldn't want to, we can't say that those won't be asked for by hypothetical future tenants. Is that fair, Tim, to articulate it that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw a comment from Alona that ultimately the Ulster County Industrial Development Agency is the board that governs the use of pilots through what's called a uniform tax exemption policy. And so, whatever that policy says about how projects qualify and prove that they qualify for those pilots is set through that policy. And, I think it's a robust discussion, I know, in the town of Ulster and elsewhere in the county about whether and how that UTEP should govern the use of pilots and make them either more difficult to obtain or with certain contingencies and strings attached. But ultimately, that's for the IDA board to make those decisions. And I think it's likely that at a site like this, with the size of the campus and the kind of assets of its location and its infrastructure, that larger projects may come along once it's under the control of a responsible developer, that will be the kinds of projects that would typically look for pilots, but they would go through that IDA process.
Just two other quick points, because I think this is obviously one of the key issues. One, I really think this is probably the most important point at which I'd ask this group to remain engaged, not just around Tech City, but to be a little less diplomatic than Tim. Like, we need more public voices in reforming the UTEP specifically, which is the rule book, the playbook by which the IDA board can award tax incentives or not. And right now, I think almost 99% of people in the county plus would agree that needs some work. We might agree how, but so that's just one point. The other point that I do think is important to say here is the other alternative at this site is nothing. And I know that's a hard argument to stomach sometimes, but we've seen 27 years of that at this site. That's a very real, visceral thing, certainly at this site. That might be different in other locations and with other projects. It's different in each case. But to me, this is the kind of site where we've had almost 3 decades of nothing, where there's millions and millions of dollars of kind of negative value and assets, where if there's any place that it does make sense to do incentives, this would be that place. And so I do think that's important context. We certainly won't all agree on all those points, but that's the honest, transparent answer on that question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's go on to Alex Panagiotopoulos. It's very exciting to see 1,000 jobs, according to Getty. I'm not going to be able to say that name, Alex. I'm sorry. A piece which used foiled emails. National Resources is saying at this stage that 50% of the jobs will be minimum wage. My impression is that businesses are having trouble filling minimum wage jobs as it is. I am pro growth and pro increasing our productive forces, but where are these workers going to live? Where is the power going to come from? Either lower rents or build a massive amount of affordable workforce housing in Ulster County?
I can take it first. Alex, hey, you're right on as usual. Yeah, I mean, I think those are all interconnected points here, so there's no short answer, but I'll try to, I think I kind of talked about the housing, workforce housing piece. That's just an obvious required thing that we've got to make sure is part of this, both this project, but also more broadly across the county. And again, that's where, March Gallagher's put out some really good recommendations on specific tangible changes to the IDA policy, for example, as it relates to housing and incentivizing things like that. Obviously, the market is not working to provide housing that all of us can, afford to live in right now, as it overserves the higher end of the housing market over and over again. On the jobs and wages part of it, the good news, no, I know a lot of folks on this line aren't huge fans of IDAs, but one of the good factors of the IDA is that there are living wage and other requirements that are then imposed, as well as prevailing wage requirements when those incentives are given. So it actually gives us a little bit more leverage on those items if we have the UTEP right, So in a weird way, that's a tool that we could think about on those points. I think we're not in a position to be able to require certain wages at this point on all jobs for the deal. I wish we were, but I don't think that's where. That's not where we're at. I think certainly if you look at other projects that National Resources has done, they have a lot of real good, well-paying jobs, but they also do have some in the low and middle skill segment as well. And we have needs for all those jobs right now in the county. Alex, if you want to jump in, and if there are specific parts of that, I'm probably not, or Tim, if you want to add more to it. I know what you're saying. We're all going to be, I think we're all obviously concerned about that and watching it. It's just a question of how do we have teeth to fully enforce that. And I think that's where
they said 50%, like at this stage, to say 50% at this stage, I know it's 10 years out, maybe before it's real, but it's 500 jobs. I just can't imagine like 500 apartments where people can live on minimum wage. I don't get that. That's where I just need a little guidance what the roadmap is here, because people can't live on minimum wage as it is around here. So
I have an idea. If I can jump in, is that all right, Laura?
Sure.
One thing to do, and I think the county executive suggested this, sort of there maybe should be an IDA modification to the uniform tax exemption policy that is specific to Tech City. And you could actually have, different pilot schedules depending on the value of the jobs. So, and you can actually rule out entire industries through that UTEP process and through the land use process that the town of Ulster is going to go through. But you could say, we're just not going to have any distribution facilities at this site over a certain size. Or if you're applying for a pilot, you have to pay certain types of wages. So I think it's a tool that really could be used to for the county and for the community to really articulate what they find acceptable there. So that's one thought. You really could say, we're not going to give a pilot for anybody that doesn't have, at least 75% of the jobs paying at least, above AMI or something like that.
Tim, can you talk also, that's a great point, March, to the 50%. I mean, my sense is that was obviously not anybody's goal, but a thing put on paper to not
Yeah, to not
overpromise.
overpromise. I mean, I think that's the stage that we're at in this process is, remembering that what's before us now is an acquisition, which obviously is for the purpose of putting stuff on the campus, but the putting stuff on the campus part is what comes next. And, I think the proposal, which again, there's an outline of the proposed vision for the campus in National Resources proposal back in September or so, when they submitted a proposal from an RFEI that we had open that describes the mix of uses that they're proposing. And, I think they largely echo what I've heard from Town of Ulster citizens before when the county executive and I came and talked with you. And I think there were a couple conversations about what should we see at that campus. It looks like the proposals that National Resources is putting forward align with those. So, I think the specifics about the wages of the jobs and what percentage or at what wage is obviously yet to come in the future. And it's something that, we'll continue to use whatever levers we have to try to affect better paying jobs, quality jobs that help support folks living in our community where costs are, unfortunately, due to no one's direct control, are ever increasing. So, but as the county executive says, we have limited levers. And, unfortunately, one of the levers is to use incentives through a pilot or something like that in order to accomplish some of those goals. And so it's obviously a trade-off. But I think as the comptroller pointed out, there's some ways that maybe we can design that lever to be as targeted and effective as possible on this campus.
Thank you. I'm seeing here some talk about the owners that bought, the 6 parcels on the very east side of the campus. Did they pay any portion of the back taxes? And they can't get to their property without National Resources giving them permission, right? Because they're sort of islands surrounded by National Resources now. What do you have any sense of what that relationship is going to be like? May they bow out at this point because they didn't do any due diligence clearly as to what's going on over there?
Yeah, we are, I'll say, we're concerned about the lack of public engagement by the buyers from the beginning. The deal happened directly from Mr. Ginsberg to the buyers. There was no attempt by the buyers to engage anyone in any community members, elected officials, government, town, county, state, anyone. I think it's an example, frankly, of how things can go wrong and sideways, and sometimes unintended consequences of leaving things to their own. You get something even worse. That's not necessarily what's going to happen here, but we, at this point, just don't know. The buyers did as part of the deal pay about $3 million, I think it was, Tim, in back tax liabilities on those properties. These were the most valuable and productive and ready to use buildings on the entire campus. So these were kind of the quickest that someone could buy and turn around and actually put to work quickly. So it's not surprising that they were the ones purchased. The point you made, Laura, is really important about, it's very wonky, but this site is carved up into 27 or 28 different parcels, but it includes this master parcel, which is kind of like the keys to the kingdom, where it includes all the roads, all the access points and egress points. So Mio Marino is now would be on an island, surrounded and not able to actually access their properties except through the owner of the master parcel, which would be National Resources. So I think bringing in National Resources could help us have significantly more leverage on the buyers, Mio Marino. And Tim, can you just pop up the map actually for a second? I'll show, you can kind of see it. It's a little hard to see on the scale of this map, but basically, so the blue, the light blue on the far east along the railroad tracks, those are the parcels and buildings purchased by Mio Marino. And then the yellow is everything, as Tim said, that is proposed sale, which includes, you can see very faintly, there are line, fully surrounding those blue is yellow. And that's not an accident. I will say, to National Resources' credit, in my opinion, their willingness to still take on this site, even with those parcels not part of the deal, to me really speaks to their willingness to take on even more risk, because those were certainly the most quickly turnable, valuable buildings on the site, according to all independent, engineers and other folks who would assess.
To me, that was like a final FU to all of us by Alan Ginsberg, what he did there. But okay, so what other questions do we have here? Okay, so there's concern about, and I'm sort of paraphrasing some questions and what I'm seeing. If I'm missing anybody, you'll let me know. About what National Resources is going to do. Are we going to get an Amazon, which none of us want, or a PepsiCo? How much sway will we have with National Resources to get things there that we want to see happen there?
So at the high level, I think we have a tremendous amount of influence, but certainly not. I mean, this is a decision to sell to a private developer. Like, we want to be clear about that. So we don't have a final veto, but the points of leverage that we have, number one, again, actually are incentives and so on and so forth, where that going through that process and having an IDA board that aligns with the values that, would look out for the public interest, is an important check and point of leverage to all the previous comments. Certainly, I've spent personally probably close to 20 hours with Mr. Cotter at this point. Our team has spent, I don't even know how many hours speaking with them, touring their other sites. In their past projects, I think they've shown a real willingness to engage and to take that feedback. But I think it'd be unfair to guarantee. I mean, I certainly can't guarantee anything. I can guarantee that I would strongly oppose Amazon specifically, and don't believe that that is their intent here. But they have one of their proposed items was, or a proposed sector. So the proposed sectors, and Tim can maybe talk about this in greater length: food and farming and agriculture, which they've done very well at the Fishkill site on, film and creative, and really production and post-production space, which they've built up in addition to other sites, primarily at their Yonkers site. They took over the old Otis elevator building in Yonkers on the waterfront, and it's a beautiful, successful project with, in that case, really good paying jobs in that sector. One of the areas that we'll have to most closely focus on, as they did in their initial RFEI, talk about distribution and logistics. And I think that's the area that, would be of most, to your point, Alex, about wages, to the point about what kind of industries we want in here. Like, that's the one that we'll really have to look at and apply the most public input. And certainly myself, I'm committed to look to using, my voice and discussion. So,
and I will also say on Wednesday, at the press conference, I invited Joe Cotter and Lynn Ward to attend the citizens meeting, and they both said that they would be happy to do it. So as soon as we get an opportunity to make that happen, we will do that so that they can hear from us directly.
And I just want to jump onto the points that Pat was making. The other thing is, there's still obviously a local land use process that any project has to go through. And In this case, a lot of work went into a master plan for the Tech City campus back in 2009, which is a long time ago, but in many ways, in conversations with National Resources, as we shared that master plan with them and they reviewed it, they felt that it was still a fairly accurate representation of what the market would demand on the site. And so I think their intent is to stick to that master plan and the generic environmental impact statement that undergirds it, and to move forward with uses consistent with that plan. And if they decide to do something drastically different, there's some background noise. If they decide to do something drastically different, they'd have to go through the planning process to do it.
Hey, Dan Whalen. I love you, Dan. Do you mind muting? We're hearing your background.
Thanks, Pat. So I mean, clearly they're their own company and they've bought the land, they can do what they want, but I think if the community stays engaged, that's going to be our best hope of seeing more things over there that we want. And that was one of the things that I was most impressed with hearing from Lynn and Joe at the UC Advisory Board meeting when they made their initial presentation to us, was how they did talk about community, and they have a much better outlook than we've heard from other folks wanting to do things coming into our town. So I think we should take advantage of that, and Town of Ulster citizens definitely will, and try to keep an open dialogue with them, and to get, you know, as much as of what we want as we can. But ultimately the decision is theirs. Okay, so other questions here. One that's come up is, what if there's something, are there any out clauses in the agreement with National Resources if vetting finds anything negative about them? Or further vetting, I guess it would be.
So maybe I'll jump in on that. There's, as I mentioned, a purchase and sale agreement that will ultimately govern the final transaction here. That purchase and sale agreement, really, the big terms are spelled out in the settlement agreement with the court. So they're what I've shared with you. To just be specific, I mentioned that there's milestones for cleanup and to start the redevelopment of the campus. And if they're not achieved, there's a clawback provision. On that front, I can say that very specifically, there's timing for cleaning up the debris piles on the campus, for stabilizing and remediating Building 1, which is one of the large old buildings on the east side that, if not properly maintained, could create another kind of environmental challenge as asbestos containing materials are in the building and need to be secured so that they don't deteriorate and become friable. So that building would have to be addressed within a year of the 2 years of the cleanup or of the purchase. And then within 5 years, which is kind of the outside window of our clawback provisions, National Resources would have to secure construction financing for at least 100,000 square feet of either renovated or new space on the building, which is our milestone that tells us that not only have they completed the cleanup, that they've also started moving forward with the redevelopment of the campus. As far as kind of whether anything in the process, whether anything comes out that makes National Resources seem to be not the partner that they're perceived to be, we've done a lot of that due diligence. I'm sure that if some bombshell were dropped, you know, if some behavior of theirs in the time between now and a closing were to occur, that could influence it. But otherwise, I think if you do your homework on this firm and their track record, I think you'll find, as we have, that they have a 30-year track record of doing this work in communities. Of course, everyone has an occasional complaint, but I think in terms of their references, they check out, they've been a good partner for other communities, and we believe they will be here too.
Okay, so we are at an hour, which is what we had agreed to. Did we get to the big questions? I'm looking, I think we covered most of this or all of it, at least in the topics that we've discussed. Is there anybody feeling that you really need to ask a question? And Tim, I'm having a hard time seeing everybody. Could you unshare your thing? Yeah, there we go. Is there anybody that really has a burning question while we have Pat in here of a topic that we didn't cover? Andrew?
just a quick comment from Andy Verdun to Pat or anyone else. In a nutshell, end of story. How did we get stuck with this? Like, how did IBM manage to go bump and now it's our problem?
So I think, I mean, I was 14 at the time probably, so I might not be the most qualified to weigh in. There might probably others on this call that would know more. I mean, I think the situation then was obviously IBM left in 93. There was a shuffle to figure out what would come. In 1998, Mr. Ginsberg came along and I don't know what vetting was involved at that time. I honestly don't. We'd have to go back and look at that. But clearly not enough. And there weren't clauses and conditions there, which we have incorporated here into this agreement to require him to deliver. I mean, to me, the short end of it is you vet the partners, which we've done extensively here, as we've talked about and happy to talk about more. And then you trust but verify. I mean, you write in clauses and clawbacks and protections. And then the third thing that you do is you add additional gates and wickets along the way so that as you go forward, to the point about any other tax incentives and local approvals that Tim had talked about, none of the big projects or lifts here can happen without additional significant public input from town board and town of Ulster, from potentially the IDA board, and certainly the public. And I mean, I would ask us all to think about, like, we have the formal processes and all these things. I think we could all agree they're not working perfectly and ideal. So what other things would you all want to see, and could we do here to try to, going forward, do this better than was done in the past and make sure there is more public voice? That's certainly what we're trying to start the conversation with this session as well, which I think is somewhat out of the ordinary in a good way. And I appreciate you all participating in. Like, we have a significant ability to control our own destiny here, particularly if we're willing to be constructive. I know there's a lot of frustration. I know there's a lot of mistrust. This is really hard. Like, if this were easy, it would have been done 20 years ago, right? And so, am I 100%? Of course not. That'd be dishonest. I feel very good and confident on this. And particularly because it is just the beginning. And we have more steps. But I think what you're getting at, Andy, is a good question, which is, like, the way we got to the way we are now is we didn't have enough eyes on it and involvement and clawbacks and controls. And we really factored that into how we structured this deal this time, as to the maximum degree possible.
So IBM just sold it to Ginsberg and now we're stuck.
That's right.
But it sounds like you're trying hard not to be stuck again. Thank you.
Yeah, beyond trying hard, I mean, I feel very confident that we're not going to be stuck again. That we've done all the due diligence and checking and added down the road. I mean, this is a 5, 10, 20-year effort here. It's 357, I think, acres, and at its maximum, almost 3 million square feet of space. So that, you know, none of this happens all that quickly.
I just want to jump in with a clarification. I saw a question about whether or not this purchase includes Enterprise West, which are the parcels on the west side that we foreclosed on 2 years ago. No, it doesn't, although in a separate but related conversation, there's a discussion about an option for this developer to have some role on the west side, not a purchase immediately, but some other role, given that there's, I think a need. We put out an RFEI back in July, looking for a partner a lot like this that could help us get those buildings up and running. And Jonathan Burkhart asks if there's space that he can rent for film and television production. That's certainly one of the things that is in deep discussion with National Resources. It was in their original proposal, and I know that they've been in discussions with Upriver Studios, Stockade Works about potential partnership, which we would love to see as well. So yes, Jonathan, and thank you for asking.
Just the other important context there. I mean, one of the things I think we have a real opportunity here in the 5-10 year window is, to the point about wages and jobs as well. You know, if we can show, and in my proposed county budget, we propose several $1 million on the west side to try to bring in real workforce development and educational partners. We've had commitments from SUNY Ulster, from BOCES, from Bard College. We're talking with SUNY New Paltz, from Stockade Works to do film workforce development and training. You know, some of this is on us to make sure that we're educating and training our folks of all ages and generations with the skills that'll allow them to have more, you know, to demand those jobs. And I know that's a bigger philosophical debate, but at our local county level, like those are the things that we can tangibly do to make sure that our workers are better prepared and able to be paid what they should be getting. So part of the idea on the West is there will be greater public investment and involvement there because we control that fully. And that's where we'd have those kinds of job training, educational partnerships, so that when a company is looking to come in, we can say, we've got the ability to actually train our folks in the skills that you need. So that's something we're excited about as well.
If I can also jump in, I see one conversation in the chat that just, I want to clarify that, you know, it's worth remembering that the county does not own these parcels on the east side that are subject to this sale. They are privately owned. They're underwater due to taxes and the environmental costs of cleanup and really, quite frankly, other smaller things that are just marginal compared to those two big buckets. And, you know, and so I think it's worth noting that the proposal here is not for the county to sell these properties. It's to find a way for the county to help reduce some of the liabilities on the property, to make them not so underwater so a developer can purchase them and put them back to productive use. And quite frankly, as I think the executive pointed out before, if we don't have a partner that's ready to take on these properties and make those investments, they will ultimately be borne by the county and then levied back against the properties as liens. And that ultimately digs us farther into a hole, doesn't get us anywhere productive, just creates a bigger challenge that at some point we would have to come back and revisit with potentially bigger dollar amounts that we'd have to offer in credits to a developer that's willing to take on all those costs. So just wanted to clarify that as it's coming up in the chat.
Thank you. I was going to ask you to address that. So we are over time, and it is Sunday, and I think we did get through all of the questions. This is not the end of the discussion. At Town of Ulster Citizens, we will keep working and go at different angles of this and find different ways to keep informing the public of what's going on. We're incredibly interested. I'm thrilled by the possibilities of what can happen over there. And I do want to say a thank you to Pat and Tim and all the people that were involved in this. This was not an easy thing to pull together at all. And I'm remembering an article maybe a year or two ago when with Supervisor Quigley, who made a statement that nothing can be done over there. There's nothing that can happen. And here we are at a very different juncture in time where we're looking at many positive things happening. And are we all going to get exactly what we want? Probably not. But if we look for perfection, we'll never get anywhere. So I think we're getting a lot of things in this deal. And I have faith that we're going to find out a way to get Ginsberg. I know that's not our motivation, but perhaps we can do something in the end just to get some satisfaction. But thank you to Pat and Tim and everybody. I know Brian Cahill, our county legislator, who worked very hard on this deal. And everybody, thank you for all the time and hard work to pull these different threads together and seize upon this one particular moment in time that is really an anomaly. It's never happened before. So thank you for not missing it. And I'd like to thank everybody for being here on a Sunday. I think this was a great turnout and I appreciate your questions and everybody for being here. So thank you for your participation.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your Sunday, everyone.
Bye.
Bye now.